Welcome to the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome's Zoom presentation series. My name is Rick Carpenter, and as today's host, it is my privilege to introduce our speaker, John Meyer. John's topic is pivoting on climate and depletion by substituting progress for growth. John is currently president of the NGO Canadians for a Sustainable Society. As owner and designer with a small medium manufacturing company, John brings much practical experience to his exploration of the energy transition and sustainable living, topics he has illuminated in two recently published books. John has demonstrated what he professes in this regard by building a house of his design, which he expects will be energy positive eventually. Following the presentation, I'll put questions from the audience to John in the order they appear in the Zoom chat function. John, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Rick. Pivoting on climate and depletion by substituting progress for growth. Can we grow our way out of climate challenges and depletion? I don't think we can, but I think the path is open for substituting genuine progress for the kind of growth we've had in the last 50 years, which has not benefited a wide range of people in the West. Presentation outline. This presentation is going to be basically aimed at people who are familiar with these subjects. There are a lot of slides. I'm going to blow through a fair number of them quite quickly, and for a more detailed look at some of for a more detailed look, people can look at the YouTube. There are a lot of slides here, and we need to understand our current situation. And we need to learn how to keep the planet human friendly. There are massive obstacles to achieving that. And once we deal with some of our own internal problems, what direct action would we take? What just happened? In the last 400 or 500 years, Europeans have colonized the New World. We've benefited immensely from fossil fuels, which enabled us to grow our population and consumption and increase our knowledge immensely. A lot of this has been on a resource base in the New World, and also on the resource bases of the undeveloped world developed by the developed world. So there's been a one-way flow of resources. This is not this is a highly fragile system. Okay, where are we? Here we are. Humans basically haven't changed for the last 250,000 years, but we really got going on the path to civilization in the last 12,000 years when the climate became much more stable. That's a Goldilocks zone, the civilization development zone, and we are right now exiting that zone with quite dire implications. But what's the problem? If you look at the economic numbers, the GDP just keeps on streaking up. With that metric, you wouldn't know we were going to have had a problem, or we're going to have a problem. So the biophysical world is something that can't be read by using dollars. We are becoming slowly, increasingly aware of our biophysical threats. COVID has really gotten our attention. It got it quickly. The climate challenge is gradually sinking into a lot of people. Depletion is in the background, and we haven't really paid a huge amount of attention to that. But all of these issues, all of these threats, They manifest themselves directly and also indirectly through social upheaval. And that's something we have to be very aware of. Equality levels, people who feel oppressed to begin with don't want to bear the cost of change. The energy challenge. Here's the EROI mountain. The EROI is energy return on energy invested. Down here, when we were starting to use fossil fuels, the resources we were discovering just got richer and richer and richer, to the point where you could get 100 barrels of oil out of the ground for each barrel of oil in energy equivalent you invested. Now we're past that point. The world oil EROI is around 17 to 1 now, I think. Charlie Hall will be speaking on this, I think, next week. And so we're into an era of declining richness of resources that will present extreme problems for us, extreme challenges. We need a standardized energy measurement unit. We need to understand what our energy budgets are, not cubic feet of natural gas plus kilowatt hours plus liters of gasoline plus tons of coal. We need to break it into one metric, and I'm saying that should be kilowatt hours per capita. You can see that the southern countries, they have less consumption of energy, and that's fairly largely driven by their low demand in the southern climates. Here, Canada's daily energy budget has grown. There's the Inuit pre-contact, Forest Indians pre-contact, and then for about 200 years, Canada, consumption was about equal until oil really hit in the early 50s. Then our demand just skyrocketed at 85% fossil fuel free. In other words, only 15% of fossil fuels. I'm saying we can have a sophisticated society at about 150 kilowatts hours per day per person. Okay, shameless plug. A lot of this is covered in my latest book, and that's in the library system. What have we learned from the pandemic that we can apply? We should have learned something. But there is no going back for us. Fossil fuels hasn't given us just toys. It's allowed us to inhabit areas of the world where large human populations were never possible. It's given us education, science, health, and social support structures. And that managing to maintain those on a much lower energy budget, again, is a challenge. Here's showing the empire belt before fossil fuels. Empires with dense populations and high levels of civilization grew up in these areas in the southern regions. Now fossil fuels have allowed us to maintain large populations in northern climates. And as an example, extreme example, before contact, say the year 1500, 2,000 Inuit inhabited the 1.5 million square kilometer Canadian Arctic, whereas in Europe, there were 90 million people living in an area 30% smaller. So disposable energy dictates the population size and the level of sophistication that society can achieve. We've been going overboard in depleting this planet, and we have a choice. Is it going to be business as usual, or are we going to evolve into a species that can live within Earth's natural limits? So anyway, is it going to be King Kong or the sustainer? We do have a choice. where do we have to be in terms of emissions? And I'm using climate as a proxy. There are many indications of depletion. I'm using energy as the proxy for basically everything, energy and climate. The average level of emissions we have to be at apparently is this line here, and you can see how much overshoot we've got in the more developed countries, northern countries particular, and a couple of countries are near where they have to be, and it'll become easier for them to transition to renewable energy. Okay, we need to look at the world a different way rather than just more is better. And this ethos has existed throughout human history, I believe. In Japan, the saying is the sun gets the better rice field. The Greeks, a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they will never sit in. So it's generational transfer. You transfer a healthy environment and healthy society down to your children. We've done that for, well, probably hundreds of thousands of years. And lately in the fuel, in the money-driven and fossil fuel society of the last 400 years, we've forgotten that. This is something that I'm going to go right past, but this is my favorite quote. For us, sustainability is a theory. For hunter-gatherers, it was a way of life. And here are the words of a 19th century Pacific Coast chief witnessing the rapacious nature of European society destroying his world. So having someone to tell you what it is to live in a sustainable society, what life is like, I highly recommend this. A man who said basically the same thing, researcher Loudermilk, who studied soil after the Dust Bowl of the 30s experience. He studied soil through in the 30s around the world. This is a fabulous paper. And basically, if we fail in our stewardship, we're essentially driving future generations into lower numbers and poverty. So that in the biophysical world, this is it looks the same whether you're coming from a native society or a highly educated individual from an industrial society. So are we going to pass on better tools, or are we going to leave our kids to fight forest fires with branches? That's what it boils down to. Why haven't we done anything? Most people see that there's a problem. Why haven't we done anything? It's very difficult to take on a lifestyle change when it's not immediately burning down your front door. We've got comfort, we've got complexity, we have power elites who are absolutely dependent on continuing growth in the business the way it is. There's uncertainty, and for everyone, there are going to be changes. So people feel that they're already overloaded, and in terms of the monetary system, the older generation does like free money from housing inflation, even knowing that we are really just actually taxing our kids. Who is growth working for? If growth was a solution, Canada would not have any problems at all because we've had the highest rate of growth in the developed world for decades. But the quality of jobs has declined. Our level of equality has declined from number 2 in the early 60s to mid 30s in the world. That's unparalleled. Housing has become less affordable. The quality of life has declined, and growth isn't solving these problems, it's creating them. So why is growth the number 1 priority? When a healthy society would look like this, but what we're pushing is more stuff, more money. And that's the priority of our current system, which just doesn't jive with a biophysical outlook on the world. What we need for progress, we have to organize ourselves so that progress becomes possible. Doesn't guarantee that we're going to take the right action, but in order to discuss the actions that we are going to discuss, we're going to have a national conversation that's intact and respectful and informed. We're going to have metrics which represent social and biophysical reality. We need independent research, science and research. Citizens need to trust their leaders, the media, and scientists. And absolutely, we need a high level of equality so that one group feels that they are not being crushed by change. Corrupt elites cannot motivate their citizens effectively in times of crisis, as we've seen in lately Russia, their war effort. It's a corrupt system, and it shows. Afghanistan collapsed immediately, again corrupt, and increasingly in the West, disconnected elites and disenfranchised people are feeling restive. We do have a problem. Here is in the US, which I'm sure extends to Canada, 11% of the population have a high, a reasonable or high confidence in television coverage, and 16% have a high confidence, a high level of confidence in newspapers. And the last Ontario election, I think the voter turnout was 43%. That's simply not healthy. We need to engage the public on common, relatable vision and goals. Again, trust, competence. People actually did trust our medical experts greatly, I think, certainly in the initial stages of COVID. That was a good sign, and people like Doug Ford actually took the advice, which is a better sign. And we need to have consistency of policies and not overreact to emergencies and failures, because there will certainly be a lot of those. We need a broadly understood plan for achieving goals. People have to be on board. Democracy requires a lot of work to maintain, and ours is becoming, I think, quite ragged and dysfunctional. We need a national conversation that involves most people, is relevant to most people. Right now, here's what we've got. Didn't work for Putin so well, and this is the system we've got. Very disconnected power interests who are, I guess, trying to dictate or just set the agenda by themselves. We need a round table with all of the core considerations, and contributors, the real world wealth creators and service providers. Everybody has to be sitting at the table. Finance, construction, administration, and development. These are peripheral sectors. They are support sectors. They should not be determining national policy. They should be supporting whatever this group decides national policy will be. Okay. All right. This is the most tortured, fraught slide here. I think the rule is give people something that they can understand quickly. And this is not this slide, but basically what it's attempting to show is that when you put everything through a money filter, with the priorities being cash flow, the interest being developers, cheap labor employers, asset inflation that generates debt, this is what we harvest. We get leaders like Trudeau, our priorities are the GDP, and Trudeau and Ford, essentially it's a Ponzi scheme. If we had different priorities and different optics, We'd be able to discuss from a base of common interest. We'd have clear goals. We'd look at the world through more than dollars. And we'd also involve public will. And we'd produce this, this perfect society of sunflowers here, resilience, progress, where the world can, learning can never end. And anyway, balance can go on forever, but growth collapses when it stops. Okay, here is a video clip we're going to play to indicate the mindset of the media that exists in Canada, and we just haven't had a viable conversation for decades in this country, and I think that this clip illustrates why.
Most of Canada's growth is that brain power is going to be the key input for economic productivity.
So what sort of population growth are we talking about here?
Right now, Canada's population is just shy of 40 million. And there's a movement in the country, including a group called the Century Initiative, which has what some see as an audacious goal of increasing that population to 100 million. So from 40 million to 100 million by the year 2100. That may seem like a shocking number to increase 2.5 times the population in 80 years. If we are to hit that goal, we will need the same population growth roughly that we had in the decades following World War II.
And what would that be in terms of immigration, and which regions are going to see the biggest influx?
So immigration policy has been shifting towards this. Our immigration numbers are roughly 350,000 newcomers a year. When the pandemic is behind us, that will probably go up to 400,000. There are some who would like it to be 500,000. Again, big numbers and difficult for even some Canadians to digest. We're a big country, geographically very big. There are large parts of the country that are underpopulated, but even our major centers like Toronto, which you may see behind me where I live, have a lot of room to grow, both upward. So Toronto pre-pandemic had more construction cranes working than any other city in North America, but also room to grow outward. Geographically, Toronto is growing in 3 directions. Transit is being built at a fairly good level, and we're likely to see a lot more infrastructure.
Okay, that's the Yep, that was an interview with John Stackhouse. He was a past editor of the Globe and Mail, which is one of Canada's leading newspapers. And I think the people who look at the world from a biophysical point of view, the environment, they've been very frustrated at not getting their articles published any longer the last 30 years or so. And I think John presents both the attitude and the interest of the current media that growth is the policy, and they're not going to entertain anything that challenges it. By the way, take a look at this, the whole video if you want. It's extremely educational. Might be tough to watch for some people, but also read the comments in the YouTube. We are not the only people who see this as a problem. Right now, media corporations are both the messenger and the lobby for growth, and they are owned by, to a large degree, by investment banks, not for their profit potential, but for the influence they wield. Control of the media equals control of the national policy. The previous John Stackhouse now works for the Bank of Canada, Royal Bank of Canada. The previous editor worked also for the Toronto Star Media Group and their investment division. And Barbara Frum, a very influential and prominent CBC journalist, pressed hard for years for a higher immigration level, and her husband was a developer. That's just a clear conflict of interest. But there are 130 that the Chatham Asset Management Group basically acquires control of Post Media, which is 130 plus Canadian newspapers, and they've centralized editorial operations to create common pages. And in the eyes of perhaps some journalists, they just turned themselves into a sales agency rather than a news service, certainly not a local news service. So the other side of this is political donations. In the study by William McDermott, Funding City Politics, he found that developers contributed a disproportionately high percentage of campaign donations to particularly successful candidates, and therefore, and they did it for a reason. So there you have political donations and media control pushing one agenda, which is growth. Now, we can't get beyond, we can't get very far without recognizing the problems that money is giving us. Money is a critical tool, but as a metric, it's disastrous. It's also mishandled. It's overprinted. The promise of money replacing barter is one of efficiency, where it made payment and transfers vastly easier for a wide range of goods, and it greatly simplified transactions and the range over which they could take place. The problem with money is it obscures our view of assets and the real wealth production system in both the biophysical world and in the commercial economy. It's hard for us to see which parts of the commercial economy are real wealth contributors and which are wealth transfer mechanisms, i.e. effectively taxation through asset inflation, and which are productive and parasitic overhead. From the very beginning of printed money, the printing presses were always run a little too long by the people who were running them, and those people took more than their fair share and created monetary booms and the inevitable collapse. So understand our problems, our real physical problems with both the productive commercial economy and with the biophysical economy. We absolutely have to get beyond the fog of money. And just for fun, I won't go into this, but cryptocurrency is basically the ultimate example of failure of our leaders to deal with the real productive world. So I propose my own cryptocurrency. It's called the Daffy dollar. Dig up and fill in. You get paid not by running computers generating codes that will eventually, through a lottery system, be granted a token. You dig trenches and fill them in, and that fulfills the need, and you are granted a Daffy dollar for every, say, kilometer of trench you dig up and fill in. And the output from those is the output is just the same as any, real value is the same as any other cryptocurrency. Asset inflation is not wealth creation. It feels like it if we're the ones, the older generation, getting money from our kids, being paid to live in our houses. But real estate, stock market, or cryptocurrency, the Dutch tulip bulb mania, and Cabbage Patch dolls, these do not produce real wealth, but they do represent wealth gain for a small percentage of people. They are, in effect, Ponzi schemes, and increasing the money supply is essentially a pump and print counterfeiting scheme. This is from Chris Martinson's Peak Prosperity. Says a lot in one graph. In 2005, there was $1 trillion of money supply in the US. Now there's 8.5 trillion, and inflation was inevitable. So that inflation, that monetary inflation, is obscuring the real biophysical threats that we are encountering. And that's monetary, self-inflicted damage, self-inflicted confusion with money. The real problems we should be addressing are in the biophysical realm. And here, as we move lower down on the EROI mountain to less and less rich sources of energy and resources, higher real costs will increase inflation. So we need to differentiate. We need non-inflationary banking. Fractional banking should not finance consumer goods because they're non-regenerative. They're never going to produce wealth. They have a limited life, and they should be funded strictly by, the loan should be funded strictly by straight savings. Fractional banking can be used for regenerative investments, which increase real goods production and efficiency. Okay, mistakes we have to stop making. We have the wrong goals. People are more than consumers and nations are more than markets. We have to get past that. The money fog, we have to be able to see through the money fog and get to what is real. Margaret Kennedy did some work on the inflationary costs of printed money on everything we buy. GDP, it's designed as a means of developing an equitable tax base. It's not a social metric. Please, can we stop using it? And we failed in the past to identify real costs of ethanol, cheap labor business models, oil sands, legacy costs, loss of manufacturing capacity, et cetera, et cetera. Many, many examples. We've made decisions with not having, without doing full life cycle cost analysis. Right now, globalism maximizes consumption and the people with the lowest environmental and labor standards win. Population growth. We have to stop paving over our farmland and moving people from low footprint regions to high footprint regions. The immigrant stream to Canada sees its carbon footprint increased by a factor of about 4.2. Ontario is losing over 400 acres a day to urban sprawl. And we have to get past the idea that if we just had a bigger economy, we could afford more energy. That simply doesn't work. Demanding more means that our input costs on a per unit basis will be higher. Canada's GHG performance, we've made a lot of promises and we failed to deliver on them. The real drivers, the largest drivers are balanced, are a high rate of immigration, increasing our population by about 10 million in the last 20 some odd years, 25 years, and the oil sands. That's pushed up our CO2 emissions. And meanwhile, I wonder if these departments ever talk to each other. Okay, we're in an image is reality society. Climate change is a hot thing to talk about. People politicians take selfies with new policies, announce policies, commission studies, but they don't actually do anything. The ultimate expression of this selfie society for me is the woman who drove down, I think it was last winter, at a high rate of speed down the ice on the Rideau River, inevitably crashed through the ice, and her first thought while sinking into the frozen waters of the Rideau River was to take a selfie. Neighbors got her out, people living on the riverbank got her out with a kayak with a rope on it. We won't be so lucky. There's no one really to bail us out. So we need to address fundamental problems rather than papering over the cracks with new initiatives and photo ops.
John, 40 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, social reality, real economy and biophysical reality are obscured by the money economy. We need to be able to look through that or put it to one side and look at what how our world really works. We need full cost accounting for basically everything, and from soil loss to tailing ponds. The cost of cheap labor isn't cheap for a society. International trade, we think it's great when we can get cheap stuff from overseas, but if you're running a chronic trade deficit like the US, you have two ways of paying for the goods you get, all the great cheap stuff, and that is with things that you produce and exchange, but you're not producing enough to cover the cost. So you then print promissory notes, which essentially come back to the US, and people from outside the US acquire your assets and inflate your property prices. So in effect, the $500 great deal you got on your 65-inch LED TV screen means that you're going to be paying an extra $15 a month in rent in perpetuity. The people are making this stuff for us. They do get paid, and if you can't cover the payment with what you make, they will take part of what you own. We need real world oversight, and this is where biophysical metrics really come into their own. We've developed the ecological footprint. That's a top level indicator on the national global level, pointing out potential problems. Energy return on energy investment on invested. It's a real specific cost indicator, how readily available your energy supply is, and we can take direct action on that. Ditto calories returned for energy investment, basically the same thing on food production efficiency. We really need to know if our food is costing more in energy, or crops are declining due to climate change or extreme weather, etc. Well-being index tells us how, if we broadly have social problems. Job quality expresses those problems in a very directly actionable form. Okay, if 30 years ago we had the biophysical metrics that we do today, would we have gone in so heavily? Would we have been as totally seduced by this immense resource as we have been? I think not, because it would have become apparent that the legacy costs and the costs of production would put up a real barrier to actually making money on the consistently on the exploitation of that resource. There are hard conflicts. There are growth-dependent elites, as we've covered. We have a national conversation which is shattered. That's true in a good part of the Western world. We love our toys. Consumers are loath to give up our physical freedoms and comfort. We have exactly the wrong metrics. We have increasing inequality, and we've accumulated a huge amount of debt, leaving us very little wiggle room, to the point where none of our options look particularly good. Plus the complexity of structural change, obscured further by money metrics. So looking at who's got a dog in the race for keeping business as usual, the newspaper corporations in Canada have a revenue of under $1 billion. Defense industry, $7 billion. Tobacco industry, $19 billion. Oil and gas, $94 billion revenue. But the residential housing asset inflation put $280 billion basically on the table, that would be widely dispersed. But you can see the trend in, that's the scale. of the interests involved. You can see the rapidly growing mortgage market benefits tremendously from asset inflation. So you want to know who's behind growth, follow the money. All right, this table, it's growth versus sustainable policy, tremendously counter to each other. And growth doesn't deliver what most people want. Okay, politicians assume growth, but what do people actually want? The citizens of Aurelia expressed what they were hoping for in the future: quality of life, healthy environment, sustainable growth, professional, progressive cities, which I read as job quality, vibrant waterfront. None of them voted for higher density and built up waterfronts and inflated housing costs. But that's what they're going to get. So if we were able to put our social structure in order, what would we actually do? On a national level, at every level, we have to include more than just dollars in our thinking. And on a personal level, we have to be citizens, not consumers, waiting to be handed a bigger, better deal all the time. National government has to put out clear goals and a coherent strategy, has to look after our global responsibilities, and they have to foster a proactive orientation, a tax system more heavily weighted on consumption than income, productivity, focus on productivity in the real economy, and provide a stable investment environment for people who are going to make the difference in getting us into renewable energy. Okay, the economic structure has to be broad-based and biophysically rational. And we have to stop allowing people who are unproductive to determine our priorities. We need to electrify. Huge benefits come from electrification. Change our metrics. Incentivize change and not subsidize consumption. And make sure the national conversation is based on independent research. Okay, the right elites. The elites we need are the people who are leading the way on renewable energy, electrification, return to manufacturing, etc. We need people running the progressive growing companies, and are getting rich, saving the planet. Not we don't want to be led by the people who are getting rich, destroying it. Okay, globalism. Basically, there is a new globalism alternative, cooperative development, where we support broad-based economies in all countries and teach basically countries to learn to live within their own borders to the best of their abilities. And that would give us resilience in food and energy, much better food and energy resilience, and would eliminate a prerequisite for international war. Equality in our own society. When energy costs go up, the lower incomes get crushed in the northern countries. Netherlands is an exception. You can see there, that's just outstanding equality level. I don't know how they did that, but that would be a cause for study. Income equality is driven by high quality jobs and low unemployment. That's the best treatment for social problems. And a mild labor shortage is probably the most effective engine of social health and fiscal balance if it's well embraced. So we don't need to fight aging. We need to embrace it and adapt, because a more elderly age structure is simply a given with a stable population. Okay, the government needs to provide stable input costs and predictable, so that the investors can get in there and do what they're supposed to do, which is drive progress. If you look at the typical oil costs, fossil fuel costs, that's impossible, or it's very difficult to maintain consistent investment into something that's gyrating and collapsing and booming. We need predictable basis for investment. And we need biophysical overviews of energy, and we need to make sure that the sticker price that the end user pays reflects the full life cycle costs. We need to distinguish between high-grade energy, electricity and fossil fuels, and adopt a new kind of energy, which is heat. And in northern countries, heat, being able to deal efficiently with heat, to store it and to harvest it, can take a tremendous load off the energy we have to generate. All right, we'll just run through this. An electrified society is going to use far less energy than a society, the current society, running on fossil fuels because of efficiencies. And so we don't need to produce as much energy perhaps as we thought we needed to. We don't need to produce as much renewable energy as long as it's electric. Here's where the fun begins. The transitioning from fossil fuels, burning things, to the world of electricity. Efficiency was very low, but increasing through history. Start off with wood, end up with, say, natural gas boiler, up to 95% efficient, extremely good. An electric heater starts at 100%. And an air-to-air heat pump can be 400% efficient, and we can increase our efficiency for heat generation is going to go up. So that's a hugely important factor to recognize. The coefficient of performance, it means that it's an energy multiplier effect. And it means that we can use 1 kilowatt hour of electricity and harvest 4 kilowatt hours of heat for an air-to-air heat pump. And it can go up to as high as 30 to 1 for a very sophisticated ground geothermal heat storage system. There are different types of geothermal, which we need to understand. But ideally, we're going into this area that will just get us further, give us bigger bang for the buck. Okay, Germany imports 55% of its natural gas from Russia, 45% from Norway and the Netherlands. It uses 93% of that natural gas for heat. If the 93% used for heat was dedicated to the use of electricity, that electricity could drive heat pumps, and with a COP would mean that Germany could become energy independent of Russia with a COP of national COP of 3.1. That's 3 kilowatts out for every 1 invested to handle their heating requirement and electrify, provide all of the mobility they need with a fleet of EVs. That COP would need to be 4.6. That's not ambitious over a 10-year period. It really isn't. Okay, so in effect, Germany can if they went to geothermal and heat pumps, they can fairly readily, and wouldn't help them in the next winter, could fairly readily take a large chunk of their dependency on Russia out of the picture. Now, community action. There are a lot of activist organizations operating in communities. These guys are really driving, they're doing great work. They're working in all these areas. So that's a big positive for us. But personal action, we need to downsize your choices. Number one choices, options are get an EV smaller than what you drive now, get a heat pump, and electrify all of your toys and tools. Pick a spot a community that works well in this area. And be a responsible citizen, not a rights-driven consumer. Lead by example. Okay. Likely costs of driving a car. These are made-up numbers, but typically I think it is going this way. Fossil fuel is going to be more expensive, a lot more expensive. Electricity is going to go up in price, but not as quickly as fossil fuels. And gas prices, who knows? If you buy a small EV and your grid is mostly clean energy, renewable, you break even in terms of CO2, the extra amount of energy it takes to build an EV over an internal combustion engine car at 18,000 miles. If you buy a big inefficient EV and you use the current US electricity grid mix, which includes a lot of coal, it's going to be around 120,000 miles. So it's almost not worth it. So buy a small EV. And EVs have come a long way. Efficiency is always the game. Again, here's a large chart, all the things you can do in your house, running from filming your windows in the winter, cheap and tremendously effective for the money, to the full boat geothermal heat pump, solar hot water, solar photovoltaic panels, and battery storage, hopefully in the form of an EV with vehicle to grid capability, north of well into six figures. Pick what you can afford. The building everyone needs to become energy positive and contributing to the grid and drawing from the grid, but you produce more energy than you consume. The cold geothermal storage is a bit over the top, but geothermal storage of heat is just tremendously effective. There are the turnkey decarbonation package deals. If you have money, Drake Landing, Whisper Valley in I think it's Austin, Texas, and if you can find someone to do it for you, you can cut your carbon emissions tremendously. We need to migrate the way we live. We're not going anywhere. There are no new continents. Mars isn't available to us. We need to migrate mentally from where we are to a different worldview, where progress, making the world better and life better, rather than buying more and spending more, is the pattern. And so the end of growth can be the beginning of lasting progress. Thank you very much, people. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, John. We have 30 minutes for questions now. And so far, I have 3 questions on our chat function. There will be more coming in, no doubt, but I think I'll take the opportunity of being the host to pose the first one. And it has to do with the concern about population growth. John, it's very clear that in your scheme for Canada, we want to be very careful about how we treat this. And my concern is that we are very soon to face, I think, a major increase in population migration. You're familiar with this and the causes that await. And I'm not sure how you might propose to deal with this, given that there are interests in Canada, which you presented in your talk, that would favor seeing the population of Canada increase quite radically. When you consider how to deal with the population migration problem, you have to take into consideration also the fact that we are being asked to reduce our life, our consumption, shall we say, our quality of life in the view of some people, that we have to reduce it so that populations in the future will be able to live with a degree of security. If we're concerned about those populations in the future, and there's nothing wrong with that, then it seems to me we also have to be concerned about the populations that are here on the planet today. And they may be arriving on our doorstep, even in our lifetime.
Yeah, I think our lifetime could be quite short, and they'd be arriving on our doorstep. I think your point is underlined by the naked refugees standing at the Turkish border. I think it's a Turkish border. I mean, that's just an absolute people in absolute crisis, and they're being used as political pawns. But the fundamental problem is that where we should be living is at the mid latitudes, not at the northern latitudes. We make the whole global situation worse by taking people into the northern latitudes. And we're heavily, we can do vastly better job than we're doing, but inherently it just takes more resources to live at northern latitudes. And if you look at something like the UK, which is self-sufficient in nothing, the best thing for them to do is ship a good portion of their population to Spain and Italy. And that would make that would drive down GHG and resource demand. But I mean, really, Canada does very little in terms of international assistance. We're way down the scale in terms of what we contribute. We should be making a huge effort to make the parts of the world that are in difficulty into livable. And unfortunately, it's not just biophysics. A huge part of the problem is social dysfunction. People are fleeing this social dysfunction, and that's very difficult to fix from afar. But we have to, I think, establish something that works and export our knowledge, export a lot of resources to help people fix their own problems, because we cannot absorb the world's problems, but we can, if we were so oriented, make a significant contribution to helping people fix their own problems. And that's basically my answer. I do see the certainly the I won't call it knee-jerk, but the natural response to taking people in who are in distress. But we have to double down on our foreign aid and make it meaningful and start solving problems.
Thank you, John. David Doherty, you'll be the next questioner, and Ted Manning, you'll be on deck.
Okay, thanks, Rick. So I want first to make a comment that I agree with respect to what you said on immigration. And one of the things that has bothered me for quite some time on immigration is that our policy really gets us to take the best and the brightest, most capable people away from other countries and makes those countries less able to deal with their problems in-house. I think that's really a not well-designed policy on our part. However, my question is along a different line. I was looking at your EROI and thinking that if you have something that's quite rich in energy and it doesn't take a lot of energy to harvest it, for example, natural gas or oil, you might think that that would be a preferable thing to have. And I think looking at EROI alone wouldn't be sufficient. So my question is this: should we have a waste index to show us how much waste goes into goods and services that we might buy? Presumably, we want to buy things that involve less waste production than alternatives.
Yeah, I think maybe a recyclability index. To me, that makes sense.
Well, you wouldn't have recyclability with, for example, energy, but you would be concerned about how much goes into the atmosphere or the water or the land as waste during the course of producing it and using it.
Yeah, I think that's all part of a full set of numbers. I ripped by it, but one of the EROIs was for storage and carbon capture. When you add carbon capture on the end of say natural gas or oil, then the EROI just plummets. And so solar, which looks pretty marginal at our latitude, but still works, becomes much more attractive than fossil fuels, which are much more productive, but add carbon capture onto the fossil fuels, and then they become much less attractive overall than solar. So that's the kind of math I think we need.
Yeah. So that's exactly what I was trying to get at there. That's the consideration of the waste side.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
I have a second question. I don't know whether Rick wants me to ask it now or later.
Come in later, David. I'll put you on as number 5. So
Thank you.
All right. So next questioner, Ted Manning, with John Hollins on deck.
Okay. Did Peter Bolkowski have a question? Was he in the line?
I have not seen him come up yet.
I have a very quick comment before I ask my question. That is essentially that maybe we should get Bill Reese, John Meyer, and Dave Doherty together and foster ourselves a waste footprint, some metric that could be used and help people understand that the impact, in fact, is measurable. You know, that's just a comment. I wanted to say that, John, that was very good. It covered an awful lot of really interesting stuff. And it should have really been the sort of thing that was on the Club of Rome conference yesterday, which went all day. But it did cover 2 things that really touch on what you talk about. One is the key bad messages that the financial system is built to give us. And I think that it would be very useful if you can give me a paper copy of that. I'll circulate it to the finance group who's working there, because I think they should see it. And the second one is that we're working on a well-being group to try and develop totally new goals and metrics, which might help people realize that a lot of the things that you have documented very clearly are valuable, useful, will make a difference, and so on. So my question is, how the hell do we get them to actually listen and do that?
I think one of the problems with the Club of Rome, I mean, basically, they're academics with a very specific field of study. They don't feel comfortable going outside of their field of study. What I presented today, I think would have been impossible for most of the very well-educated people we've got here and throughout the environmental movement, because they're not going to touch banking. They're not going to touch a wide range of subjects outside of their field of expertise where they feel comfortable. And I think we have to push those limits and say, nobody is looking at this in national policy, and it's really screwing up our biophysical world. So we need to address it.
So when does the revolution start, and who carries the guns?
Well, I was thinking more Molotov cocktails, but maybe we could do green splatter.
Yeah, well, we've got a really good set of good ideas there, all of which are worthy. It's really just getting the venue where they will be listened to and some of them acted upon. And that's the big challenge that came out of the Club of Rome conference yesterday.
Yeah, I think we just have to demonstrate that growth has been a failure for delivering on the social end. Never mind the environment; it's a social failure.
Our allies have already accepted that. Now, how do we get the message to anybody else?
Well, it won't be through the Globe and Mail or the CBC. That's
true. Thank you.
Okay.
It seems, John, that John Hollins, you've had your question answered already. So I guess you wish to withdraw yourself from being on deck right now.
I can ask a very short question to give the next person a chance to turn their stuff on.
The next person would be Raymond Lurie.
I was one of almost 150,000 immigrants to Canada in 1965 when the population was about 19 million. That was 0.8% population growth that year. Now, when we talk immigrants, we usually forget that Canadians also emigrate. And so the net is about 6% that year. But over the decades, many, many decades, in round numbers, we've been importing 1% of our population every year, which in our land is not really a long-term proposition. John, you taught, and that's a political decision which seems to be fixed in the psyche of Canadian politics. You made a reference, John, I think, to the caliber of the politicians we elect. I would suggest that we've had one politician who probably met snuff, and that was the gentleman who was in power when we dealt with acid rain, ozone depletion, and the early stages of global warming, Brian Mulroney. How are we ever going to get that caliber of politician back or higher in an age when you show us that the confidence of the electorate has sunk to a very low level?
Well, I think we have to do it through a national conversation, and it's not going to happen in a hobbled, constrained commercial media. I mean, I think we're really between a rock and a hard place on that. There isn't a place where Canadians can go and trust that the commentary is going to be broad, the coverage is going to be broad, and the commentary is going to be expert. People don't see them. I mean, we had the Occupy movement, we've had the free trucking freedom, and that's symbolic. That's the tip of the iceberg in terms of general discontent. People just don't see the system addressing their issues, and how do we fix that? I don't know. I don't think money would help. A huge amount of money would help, but you'd have to rebuild it. And in the time we have, I see that as being extremely difficult to rebuild confidence because we're all so split. Like we think everybody is lying, either idiots or they're lying, and it's not healthy. I don't know how we repair it. So.
Thanks. How do you keep a smile on your face?
That's right. Keep laughing. We're getting better and better every day.
Thank you very much, John. next will be Raymond Lurie. And Peter Bokulski, I understand that you're trying to come in with a question. If you are, please come on deck.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rick. So actually, my comment was in response to Peter's question about city councils, and I guess my comment, and I don't know, John, how we could solve this, but if you look at the municipal elections happening in Ontario right now, many of the candidates actually they get most of their funding from developers. There isn't that much money in Canadian politics, but the money that there is comes from developers. And, there are sites that report on how much every candidate gets from developers as opposed to the general public. And right now, some of the two leading candidates actually are quite different in Ottawa. The two leading candidates from here are quite different in that respect. One does not accept money from developers, and the other one does. So, John, we've got a system where money is there isn't big money like there is in places like the U.S. here. However, we still have a system where developers are able to influence politicians into continuing the urban sprawl and the car-friendly neighborhoods that developers favor because they make more money developing that way. So how can we get around this funding issue and getting politicians more on board with doing what's better for the long-term future?
Yeah, if you look at McDermott's study, basically that took a huge amount of work. You would think this would all be on some database for Elections Canada, but it took a huge amount of work for him to go around and get all of the data on contributions. One of the problems being that the developer might give $100, but his cousin, who doesn't work for the company, gives 2,000 or something like that, and he doesn't work for the developer, but he got the money from the developer, and this kind of thing. So there's all kinds of ways of hiding it, and we don't have a system to track it. I mean, we simply don't. And clearly, the developers, this is a cost of doing business. They're making a purchase. They're getting the results that they want, and what they need is developer-friendly councils, and they need mass immigration, because a stable population will not drive up the price of land, and apparently they make a huge portion of their profits from the increase in the price of land, as opposed to actually building the houses. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Raymond. Our next question will come from Peter Bokulski, and Madeline Weld is on deck.
Okay.
Hi, this is Peter Bolkowski. I'm Calgary based. There is somehow a disconnect in terms of the view of developers. There are developers that do new communities on the edges of existing communities and out into more rural land. There are also developers that do densification, changing the nature of our existing communities, putting up massive high-rises, and basically altering the living environment for people that are in those existing communities. Both of those represent problems, but of potentially different sorts. And we seem to be accepting that densification and the decimation of the lifestyle of people living in existing communities is an acceptable price to pay. How do you deal with that?
Well, let me expand on your first point. I was in a couple of meetings with activists trying to save Lake Simcoe. Some of the activists were from built-up areas, high-density urban areas, and others were from more rural areas. The rural people didn't want to see urban sprawl over farmland, and of course, neither did the people in the high-density areas. But the people in the high-density areas didn't want any more density. I mean, who in Toronto or Richmond Hill or downtown Calgary wants more density? I think nobody, but it's tremendously profitable for the developers. And I think if you have very dense neighborhoods, and I'm not talking high rises, I think they're an abomination, but a European city, say four stories, 3-4 stories broadly over the urban environment, that we've always seen as the most efficient way to house a lot of people with a minimum number of resources. I think that's absolutely true with fossil fuels. It's absolutely true when you use a foreign source of energy, a distant source of energy. But suburbs can become vastly more energy efficient and possibly even energy positive if we invest in microgrids, putting solar and geothermal into those, all through those housing developments. I think they become vastly less of a problem environmentally. And I don't think we're in a position now where we can actually rip everything up and consolidate, especially not with 500,000 people. And that's about what it is coming into the country now. I mean, we're stuck with the model, we're stuck with what we've got, and we've got to make huge changes, huge cuts in our carbon emissions in the next few years, and just rebuilding our cities totally, I just don't think is viable.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Peter. We now will take a question from Madeline Weld, and Charlie Hall, you're on deck.
Yeah, John, it seems that at the beginning of your talk, you said the flow of resources is mostly one way from developing countries to developed countries. And I was just wondering about that because there's, food exports from developed countries. And I was surprised to learn recently with the farmers' strike that the Netherlands is the second largest exporting country in the world, overall food exporting country after the US.
Yeah.
And then there's also like finished products that, electronic products or whatever, various kinds of finished products that, like everybody in Africa has a cell phone. Where are those cell phones made? I guess mostly China, which is also a developing country, but.
Yeah, I'm talking more on the resource base level, energy and
okay, right.
material. I mean, Netherlands is an exception. As I said, UK is raw material deficit, deficient on everything. Norway exports a huge amount of energy, but they also import an incredible 50% of their food supply, as does Sweden, which is also an energy efficiency superstar. Mm-hmm. So basically, Great Britain was built essentially on the resources of the empire. They started out with coal and steel and turned that into an empire and imported huge amounts of resources and controlled the resources. And a lot of Europe did the same, but there is a flow both ways. But I think that I strongly suspect that the less developed countries are having the resource carpet pulled out from underneath their feet and not getting the benefits.
I think I read somewhere that towards the end of its empire, it was costing the British more than they were getting from their colonies.
Probably. I mean, that's what spelled the end of the Roman Empire. You expand, you expand, you expand, and finally you're expanding into more marginal areas, and the cost can't be borne by the areas you've conquered. So grow and die. That's the model.
Right. Grow till you die. Okay.
Thank you very much, Madeline. Next question will be from Charles Hall, followed by David Doherty.
I just wanted to make a comment that when you were talking about your own government in society, that from south of the border, we always thought you guys were much more together and rational than us. At least the intelligentsia did. So if you think you've got problems, look what we've got down here.
Yeah, you can see your problem, Charlie. We can't see it. We don't have the institutions. We don't have the studies. You can either assume, like, we don't have the information on political donations, but you can assume from that that either we're just so much more honest, mild-mannered Canadians than the corrupt Americans, or you can assume that we're dumber and more corrupt. That can go either way. So if you don't know anything, it doesn't mean it's not there. The US has a process for outing things, becoming, looking for information, digging for it, and we don't.
We have some virtues, I guess. It's a mixed bag for sure. Well, I'm going to talk next week about, if I can get my camera to work, I'm going to talk next week about why I don't think it's likely that the thing that's likely going to limit people in our assault on the earth is going to be resource shortages and not what we choose to do voluntarily because we don't.
Yeah.
And that too is very arguable and so forth, but I'm going to try to take that position.
Okay, no, I'm looking forward to that, and we'll see if we've got enough carbon rope with which to hang ourselves, and I think we probably do, but we'll see what you turn up.
Please send me your PowerPoint so I can.
Yeah, will do.
Thank you, Charlie, for your observation. One thing I do know is that we've got to work together on this. Our final question, with just 3 or 4 minutes to run to the hour, will be from David Doherty. And unless there's another question and David has a very short one with a short answer from John, that will be it.
Okay, thank you. So it could well be a short question, a short answer. I wonder if you know how much of Canada is ice, how much is rock, how much is muskeg, how much is near desert, how much is water, as opposed to habitable land. I know we have 10 million square kilometers of land, but how much of it is actually habitable? Do we really have a lot of unoccupied living space?
Do you want that to 4 decimal places?
No, no, the nearest 5%.
Well, everything is habitable if you have infinite energy. Everything is habitable. In the early days of the 50s and 60s, if we had that kind of energy available, we were getting more and more and more of it. It was getting cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. We could have grown bananas on Baffin Island. We would have had that ability. Now, I'm in Parry Sound. Look it up. I'm halfway up Georgian
Yeah, I've
Bay.
been there.
Yeah, okay. Essentially, our good farmland, our best farmland, stops 80 kilometers south of me. Okay, and if you look at the map of Canada, the whole country, Parry Sound looks as though it's on the American border. So I think 7% of our land is suitable for agriculture, and we're paving over the very best land and reliable land in southern central Ontario at the rate of 300 acres a day. And basically, we don't have that much. Everywhere else in Canada, it's the further north you go, the higher the energy demand and the resource demand goes. Food is extremely expensive in the north because they don't grow it. They have to import it. And it's also wrapped in plastic. The further it travels, the more plastic it's wrapped in, and the higher the energy cost of it is. So basically, it's a small country in terms of sustainable, healthy. It's a small country.
Thank you.
Well, we could fit in one more question here. I think John Legg would like to pose a question. We have a couple of minutes for that.
Okay.
Are you there, John?
Thank you. Yep, start my video. Okay, there we are. John, a wonderful presentation. Lots of interlocking questions. Here's another interlocking question. The growth people seem to now be slowly switching to the idea that there will be a recession coming up. If one looks at, and I did yesterday, the definition of recession, it is simply a period of non-GDP growth. Okay, here's the opportunity with a lot of traps, it seems to me. I have only started to think of some sort of op-ed piece, and I'd like your views on this. And the op-ed piece would put together the fundamentals of limits to growth. Now, I quite agree, and you mentioned, I believe both, you certainly mentioned Putin, and that's the resource wastage question. And the COVID, I think you probably did as well, and you could say that comes into inefficiencies. But it just seems to me this is such a great opportunity to write something which says, look, we're now going into a non-growth GDP, non-GDP growth era. Can we now see the truth of what was put forward in 1972, limits to growth? This will be a test case, and we're already seeing the problems by not following that thinking. Do I make myself at all clear? I find it such a rich area that I find it difficult to.
Well, it is rich because I mean, even if GDP shows an increase, we're still getting poorer. And I think that I forget exactly what the percentage of the finance GDP, the finance industry is, but if we're printing money and we're counting it, basically the economy is growing. Great stuff. And the people who benefit from inflation, great stuff for them. And it doesn't show the biophysical problems that we're having. That's the problem. A period of stability is absolute death for those who live on live by. So, you know, I think differentiating with our current system between the messages of limits to growth and what we're experiencing now, I think maybe the message to me is that our system, we're having huge problems, and our system isn't displaying them properly. A cessation or a reduction in commercial economic activity, which is what a recession is, that's, to me, that's a good thing. Depending on how you measure it. So it's an opportunity to refocus. But I think in terms of an article, I'd try and make the point that we can't solve our problems. We're going to have repeated recessions. It's inevitable if we're depending on, unless we get control of the money system.
Okay, well,
sorry.
That's certainly one aspect of it, but I think there are many others, and I'll try to turn out a draft.
Okay.
And, see where we can go from there.
Rich area, as you say.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, questioners, and especially thank you, John Meyer, for such a fine presentation, rich, as you say. So on behalf of the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome, I would like to thank you very, very much for this presentation. And I think, as we can see from the very positive response within this forum, that you've stimulated a conversation which is going to continue. And let's hope that it becomes part of the national conversation which you are calling for.
Okay. Thank you very much for all the work you've done, Rick, and thanks for sticking with me through almost 80 slides without blowing the whistle.
It's been a pleasure. And now I would just like to say to those folks who've been listening to this presentation who are not yet members of the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome, that you have some options. First of all, if you register to stay informed, you'll get a weekly email with a lot of information on topics associated with the club's area of interest. But why not take one step further and become a member of the Canadian Club, because it has a very small fee. It is serving a very good purpose, and you also get a tax receipt.